Hey, badass black girls, and they making big moves. Hey, badass black girls, nothing that you can't do. They are the future, I'm trying to tell ya. They want the best, no time to settle. They got the strength to handle the pressure. These are the queens, nobody better. Yeah, changing the narrative, that is imperative. They about to rock this. Tell the women that you got this. Got no time for people who are toxic. It's all love, good vibes. You know I got your back, girl. Talking issues that matter. This is badass black girl, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Badass Black Girl. We have a very special guest with us today. Her name is Shaneé Yvette Murrain. Hi, Shaneé.
Hi, MJ.
Thank you so much for being here. Everybody should know who you are because you're doing such great work in the community. But I'm going to let you introduce yourself for those who did not have a pleasure to meet you before.
Sure. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction. My name is Shaneé Yvette Murrain, and I build and promote inclusive online collections that reflect our shared cultural heritage with the 4,000 plus libraries, museums, and archives across the country. I design technology to make said resources easy to find for the public through an online interface called the Digital Public Library of America. I also stewarded partnerships and curation for the Black Women's Suffrage digital collection, which I will share in the chat and leave the link with MJ so she has that to share as well. So that's the short of what I'm working on. Prior to arriving at DPLA, I've served as university archivist, director of libraries, and I've done work throughout my career working on making sure that the primary sources, which are the newspapers, the photographs, the oral histories, um, the correspondence and autobiographical writings related to African American history and specifically the Black church have been available through library digitization projects online. And digitization is when you take the analog, the paper material, and you process it through digital means to make it available and searchable online. I just have to remember that everyone, is not a librarian, so I have to define some of these words for the audience.
This is so wonderful. The other day I was at a library and I mean, the first thing I did when I moved to Winter Garden, I just moved from South Florida to Orlando. And
Okay.
the very first week I went to the library because this is the place where, I mean, a universe opens up. And it suddenly dawned on me after all those years that it's such a great place. I mean, so many resources. And I started thinking about the kind of work that it requires to have this large selection. And that got me thinking about the work that you do, ensuring that it's very inclusive.
Right.
Would you tell us a little bit about what's going on right now in terms of um, the work that you do? What is available? What are some of the challenges that you had to face in terms of making sure that more than one stories one a more than one story is told? um, just let us talk a little bit about challenges and so that we can understand your work a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I agree, like you, that the going to the public library is one of the best things to do when you're in a new city. It's the community center. It's where you find out about job opportunities and programs that might be relevant to you and members of your family. It's not just, reading and access to Kindle books. It's a space to find out really what's going on and what the priorities of your community are. And it's free. All these resources are free. So that is I love hearing that story, that is the place that you went when you first moved. So the work that I'm doing now, as I explained, I work with a national digital library. The Black Women's Suffrage project that I coordinated, it's one of the things that I'm most proud of in my career. was a project that was funded by Pivotal Ventures, which is an investment and incubation company created by Melinda Gates. And we received this special funding on the occasion of the centennial of the 19th Amendment, which is when women in the United States, some women, were enfranchised with the right to vote. And this was developed prior to my arrival at this institution, but they were, they knew that the 19th Amendment 2020 was coming, and they knew that that anniversary would inspire major national public history projects around women's history. However, this project was designed to be a collaborative digital collection that was focused on the roles and experiences of Black women in the women's suffrage movement, and more broadly, women's rights, voting rights, and activism between the 1850s and the 1960s. And this Black women's activism has historically been left out of the public narrative around women's rights. So for this project, we curated and collected and built partnerships to find cultural artifacts that would have a clear and compelling relevance to contemporary issues like voting rights and intersectionality, which Black women were grappling with and organizing around even back then, as well as contemporary movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too. And this collection of more than 200,000 artifacts expands on some of the Digital Public Library of America's existing collections about Black women's activism. And ultimately, the goal of the collection is to elevate Black women's activism and our national narrative in places where it has been erased. So again, wanting to tell a more inclusive, more full, more equitable story about the history of the women's right to vote in the US and how Black women were involved, continue to be involved in social and civic movements.
I mean, this is amazing because um, the idea that you would enter a library and not find those things, it's almost unthinkable. But the reality is that you guys had to do the work in order for the material to become accessible. We take so much for granted. Whenever we find resources, we're like, oh, of course we're gonna find it. It's a library, but those resources are not always available. And I really want people to think about this for 1 second, that it's through the efforts of people like you that we're getting that access, that we're able to find out about those important men and women who changed history.
Absolutely. So since I'm here, let's talk a little bit about libraries and how they're organized and how decisions about what's available in archives are made. So collections and artifacts like what I'm talking about that we make online through our digital collections are often kept in part of the library. You probably in it in your public library, which is the reading room, or they'll say if you're in Winter Garden or you're in Florida, they might say like the Orange County Reading Room, and it's a special place in the library. It's an archives or a special collection. And these materials do not circulate. You can't check them out at the checkout at the circulation desk. You can ask the reference librarian to allow you to see these materials, but you'll be able to handle them and view them on site. Because of the sensitive nature of them, they're often only one or limited copies of these original materials. Like if you think about a rare book or a piece of correspondence from Mary Church Terrell that's in the Oberlin, Ohio College archives. So I want to talk a little bit about so how do these things make themselves where they are. A better way to think about history in these kind of collections is what is collected, preserved, and interpreted. Collections are often gifted to or purchased by libraries based on their relevance. Like in the example that I used of the Florida room, the special collections rooms, they're based on geography. What materials might have geographical reference, subject area reference, or sometimes that donor's relationship to the faculty, library staff, or administration might play a big part in what is collected. Like if I did attend Bethune-Cookman University, I would give my papers and my artifacts to Bethune-Cookman University because of that relationship. And quite often, the library's reputation for preservation and their capacity to build exhibitions or digital collections and host public events about what is in these records is also factored into what's made accessible as well. So how much you have, who you know, and what you can do with what you've been given from the library perspective. And we should also think about collecting and the process and the concept of building a collection of your papers and photographs and memorabilia from your life across the year is very much a privilege. And then having your life's work being deemed, of value and continued research value to a library is um, another thing that affects what kind of artifacts are available for research in libraries.
One thing that happened during the pandemic, when schools were trying to figure out how they were going to give access to materials to kids, particularly in the less fortunate areas of the nation, um, it was this idea of how do we provide them with computers? How do they have access to those online courses? And of course, it brought up the fact that um, in general, it's not a an even playing field, that some people have more access than others. And of course, libraries play an important role in trying to level that field because everybody has access. But I'm thinking that once you enter the digital world, then there is the question of who can access that information. Would you talk a little bit about what is I'm sure that those are conversations that you have all the time. How do you improve access? So what has been happening in recent months in terms of making sure that people who need that information can actually access it? I'm thinking here not just about having those collections themselves, but thinking about the platforms and um, where are they accessible from home, and or do you have to go to a physical library? How does that work?
Sure, that's a great question. So with digital libraries like the one I work with, the Digital Public Library of America, um, one of the mission statement, parts of our mission is that we want these materials to be accessible for free in one place. So we have built what are called primary source sets, which are curriculum guides for K through 12 educators to use our collections. They come with built-in, out the box questions, links to these materials, and questions to develop further conversation as a part of curriculum about geography or local family histories, and they're built into Google Classroom already. So that's one way that they're further accessible and also usable. Throughout the pandemic, as an organization that is well known in the field of libraries and has many relationships with partner organizations that serve school libraries, K through 12, and public libraries, we heard a lot of discussion around accessibility when it comes to digital collections and ebooks and all kinds of curriculum and technologies that students needed to transfer remotely. And the glaring hot light symbol was broadband access. It's wonderful that we have all of these materials that are well described and made accessible through technologies like Google Classroom, and they are already able to be in some of these student management systems. However, if students overall do not have the hardware, the laptops, the tablets and the cell phones, and access to consistent broadband internet, then accessible for what? Accessible to who? A lot of the work that I've done in my role as Director of Community Engagement over the past year has been talking more about DPLA as a resource through K through 12 educators, through librarians, to the general public, so they know that these materials exist, that they've been well described, that they include educational content like the biographies of Black women suffragists who might not be as well known in the national narrative. And the site also includes a timeline of major events and direct activism that these women led, that leads up and contextualizes where we are now in this Black Lives Matter and Me Too movement. So one part is making public awareness about digital resources a talking point, and also like developing partnerships and strategy to provide funding to public libraries and schools so that these students can have the tools to be connected and assess the kind of platforms that we're creating for them to use. You have the quality in all of these formats, but if you can't get online because you don't have the hardware, then you're still disconnected. And that is, access to information is a civil rights issue. It's about democracy. It's also the nature of libraries is, we're duty bound to be a mirror for our users and include the stories of everyone. So when you get online, you see yourself represented, and providing, the youth of today who will be our leaders of tomorrow, the kind of tools they need to be competitive in a global digital world is not radical. That's responsible, and is what we should be doing.
My next question has to do with you. Um, what do you read? I'm always curious about what librarians read, and you specifically work in knowing the kind of projects that you work on. I'm curious about what you read when you're not at work.
That is a great question. The past few months, DPLA has been, we launched our inaugural book talk, and we've done 2 book talks since then, and I have the books here. So I've been doing a bit of reading, I must, admit, for work, but knowing that I'm preparing to talk to the authors has really given me the freedom to read for work, but also to read with a different kind of curiosity, because I know I had the privilege of talking to the author. And I've been thinking, like many of us have in this, plague, pandemic, quarantine year, about some of the institutions that we've seen fail us. And one of the best books that I've read in the past 6 months is called Mistrust by Ethan Zuckerman, and it's why losing faith in institutions provides the tools to transform them. And this book talks about how citizens have given up on institutions in the US and across the world, but through their own reimagining of how work, they've been able to either destroy, rebuild, or build on top of American institutions and make them vital to ways that are relevant to the community. So it's really informed the way that I think about my work. This book which I've absolutely adored, The Disordered Cosmos, A Journey into Space Matter, Space, Time, and Dreams Deferred by African-American physicist Chanda Prescott Weinstein. She talks about the history of astronomy, the study of the stars, but she really, in the universe, but she really talks about Black women and academia through this lens. And she really asks us to imagine and think about how people for millennia have been looking for answers about why we're here and what we can do. And as a theological librarian and thinker, those kind of questions are like rabbit holes that I enjoy going down. And another book that I read on vacation that I do not have on my desk is, I think it's a Oprah's book club, and it's just all over all the book Instagram and TikToks. It's called The Other Black Girl, and it's about publishing in New York and a covert operation of Black women who basically undermine other Black women in the workplace to get ahead. So it was a really interesting take of what it means to do work and to try to bring your whole self to work in hostile white spaces, and also what it means to be in community with other Black women who are doing that work. It was fascinating. So I read the recommendations of my work, and I also spend a lot of time on the Instagram and the TikTok book recommendations for my true leisure. Thank you for asking. That's a great question.
I'm also curious about that moment when you decided that you wanted to be involved in this particular line of work. Well, it might not be one moment, but a series of moments leading to it. I'm really curious about how you became who you are.
Sure. It really was a moment. I was in graduate school studying Black church history in my undergrad, which is a historically Black college in Florida within Cookman University. I became a religion and philosophy major kind of accidentally. There was a requirement that we take 2 religion and philosophy courses, and I took my 2 and really enjoyed it, picked it up as a minor, and then needed a language. So I was looking in the catalog and I was like, okay, Greek, that's interesting. Let me take Greek. It was Koine Greek for reading the Bible. And then after that, I just became really, really spellbound with asking these deep theological questions, and my interest in African-American church history grew. So I was in grad school in 2008 in seminary, continuing that interest. And I was pursuing a Master of Divinity degree. I was thinking about doing nonprofit work or getting a master's of social work to go with it. But the research piece and the finding my voice and writing about what I thought about the world was I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But I came to librarianship with a problem. So I was in a Black feminist, Black womanist class, and I couldn't find the information I expected to find, which were primary sources documenting historic Black churches. I was interested in tradition and women's leadership and membership, and I couldn't find that in digital collections. So I was introduced to librarianship by the theological librarian at my institution. And he was like, you're really good at research and we can't find the things you're looking for. He was like, have you ever thought about being a librarian? You can go to school and, learn about archives and records management and, do like what I'm doing is bring that subject area expertise to it. So after finishing my MDiv, it was like 2011, the economy still wasn't great. I went straight into library school at North Carolina Central University, which is now the only HBCU that has a library science program. There were programs earlier at Hampton University, at Clark Atlanta University, and I believe I'm forgetting one more that trained Black librarians. and North Carolina Central now is the only one who has one. So I went to library school. I wanted to create an open access, fully accessible database for scholars and study and lay people in the church and people who are ordained to study Black history as part of their, part of their interest, their genealogical interest, and also their scholarship. And when I got to North Carolina Central, I was told about the digitization of Durham, North Carolina's historic White Rock Baptist Church papers. And I was offered my first library job working on a project called Context, Content, and Capacity, which was a large collaborative digitization project on this long civil rights movement in North Carolina. And I couldn't have asked for a perfect project. The paper collections and photographs that I was working on labeling and describing for digitization and for their, online accessibility was exactly the kind of thing that I came to librarianship with. And that search for what I did not find informs all of my thinking around partnerships and around the kind of stories and the kind of projects that I like to be involved with, because I think of myself as an information seeker and what it felt like to me and what I felt called to do when I couldn't find the information I wanted to. So that's how I got to libraries.
And what were the skills that you realized that a librarian needs?
Oh goodness, here is one that is very much against the stereotype of the quiet nose in book shushing librarian. I, as a librarian, have had to cultivate more soft skills and excel at public speaking and small talk and elevator pitches, like being really able to talk about my work with the general public way more than I expected to in library school. For someone that was in a program with preachers who were, preparing themselves to give lectures and sermons every weekend, I backed away with that. It was so intimidating for me as a quiet introvert, but I do so much speaking, public speaking, and being comfortable talking to people from all walks of life and, talking to them about the kind of materials we have and really being interested in their stories, because people come to the library with all kinds of questions, and having a conversation, a reference interview, a reference transaction where you're talking to someone who just walked through the door. You don't know them from, a can of paint. This fascinating history and inquiry that brought them into the library or into your inbox, and they trust that you are going to help them in their journey to find what it is they're looking for. And that kind of comfort and being present in the moment and knowing what to say and how to say it, and just generally having good customer service skills and good relational skills was not a skill that I expected to harness in librarianship, but it has made me a more aware citizen, and I think a better conversationalist and a better friend, because I speak to all kinds of people all day.
What's next for you?
Oh goodness. Um, Hopefully doing more of this kind of work that really asks questions about who's involved, um, about the relationships and collection development priorities in libraries, are grounded in inclusivity and consciousness of the history of injustice in libraries and archives and who's left out. I want to do more of the kind of public sharing that center librarians as subject specialists and thought leaders, so we can hear from them about the collections that they handle every day and what they've learned about them and what scholars use them for. Um, I recently was awarded this was actually last month, a library journal, which is a trade publication for librarians. It's like an international library magazine that talks about library architecture and new websites and leadership and projects that are innovative. So I won an award that positions me as a digital developer for my work on Black women's suffrage. So I would also like to do more digital projects and be known in, outside of the library and digital space as someone who brings a lot of care to diversity, equity, and inclusion projects, and how our shared heritage, and also how our technical infrastructure for online education uh, is reflective of the people who will be using it and the questions that they bring to the World Wide Web.
Congratulations on your award. That's awesome.
Thank you, MJ. It was quite an honor, and I'm humbled to be recognized for what to me feels like common sense work.
And that leads to my last question. What makes you a badass Black girl?
What makes me a badass Black girl is my, what's the word I'm looking for? Non-negotiable belief in myself and my people
I love this.
and their stories. Non-negotiable. One of the things my mother told me growing up, she advocated that we read for an hour every night after dinner before we could watch TV. And as a result, my brother and I always were in like the 90th percentile of all of our standardized tests. But she told me that if I could read, I could do anything, whether it came to, putting together a bookshelf or reading a manual. She told me that if I could read, I can do anything. And as I got older and became, more independent, and thinking about, how my spirituality and my theological experiences informed me, I extended that. If I can read, I can do anything. If I believe, I can do anything. And that adage, that belief, self-belief, and belief in the future and the histories of my people is really what guides my work and makes me a badass Black girl, because I want to share that with everyone. And um, I want people, the other badass Black girls that look and believe and move in the world the way I do, completely different from I do, the way they do. I want them to believe in themselves and to see themselves represented in the historical record.
Thank you so much, Shaneé, for speaking with us today. We will for sure check out your website. It's in the description under the screen. And I'm looking forward to chatting again sometime soon.
Thank you so much, MJ. Please take a look at the Black Women's Suffrage.dp.la or blackwomensuffrage.org. Check it out. Look at the timeline. Look at these beautiful images of Ida B. Wells Barnett posed with her family. Like, look upon yourself and see that Black women have been in the middle and at the head of everything important in this country for so long, and that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and we can do those same things because we believe.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you, MJ. It's been a joy.